Hi, and welcome to part 2 of my Introduction to Therapeutic Alliance. This is where we start getting a bit more practical. We talked about how to create a safe relationship. We're now going to look at, because it's easy to create safe relationships with some people. This is about learning how to create it with everybody. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about trauma, because finally, services are catching up with this concept that most of our clients have had some sort of trauma that's driving the addiction. And if we don't look at that and understand that, it's going to limit our capacity to help people. So let me get my slides back so we can have a little look at this. So that quote, so again, one of my lovely quotes at the bottom I got from Leeds Personality Disorder Network, unbelievably amazing in terms of trauma-informed work, and very helpful if you ever ring up. If you're struggling with someone, they're more than happy to give advice. But there's this quote that just because we don't have the time or resources to help someone does not make them the problem. Now, the reality is our services, quite often, we have more people than is ideal to work with. We have people in crisis. We can refer people and services don't accept them, or they fall between the cracks of not severe enough for some services, too severe for other services, and they sort of fall in the back, and then that can come back on us because we don't want to leave someone without support, so we end up juggling a lot of different things. I've got a chap at the moment who's severely traumatized. 95% of the time he's lovely, polite, engaging, no problem. When he is triggered, that 5% of the time is very high risk, so services won't work with him. And I've tried, I think, about 10 different services, and nobody will work with him. But then he's coming back to me when he's distressed and looking to me for support. And sometimes I just have to remind myself, this is not his fault that he's not getting the help he needs. You know, it's the reality, it's not anybody's fault, it's the way things are. But sometimes it can be very easy for us to, feel a bit annoyed with people, or a bit upset that they're ringing us for the 10th time. There's a need there. They're not doing it to be annoying. There's just a need there that nobody's meeting, or nobody's got the time. Sometimes people need a lot more time than we've got. So it's just about remembering that not their fault. We've still got to set boundaries, but it's just looking at it in a different way. So we're going to talk about trauma first, in terms of whenever I've done training on trauma, sometimes they go into great detail about the definitions of what trauma is. I don't, you can look that up, you can read it. I don't need to go through it. For me personally, I don't need to know the ins and outs of how some model defines trauma. The original word comes from the word to mean a wound. I think it's Greek, comes from the word to mean a wound. And trauma is literally a wound that's happened in the past that's not healed. So if somebody goes through something traumatic and they get the help they need and they process it and they recover psychologically, it's going to have much less of an impact. People that have that wound, and we're going to look a bit more into this, as a childhood, and they don't get the help they need, it has an impact later in life. It's also when you start, now I'm not an expert in trauma, I'm fascinated by learning to be the best I can be, and learning from some of the experts. It is about looking at, a lot of them will say it's not the original event that's the trauma. So quite often people, even clients, will think they have to talk about the original event. It's more about understanding the impact that has now, and how it leaves people feeling about themselves, the world, and how it has a physical impact as well. And we'll have a little look at that. But when it comes to doing trauma-informed work, working with trauma, I think the main thing is about understanding how it impacts people. And one of the things I've put there that, our childhood affects everybody. So sometimes in order to understand it, it's about thinking about our own experience. Things that have happened in childhood, and then you can exaggerate them to understand a little bit more. So it could be, I remember someone saying they were had a phobia about balloons because as a child someone had said, when they were playing with a balloon, be careful, if it bursts it'll have your eye out. We all have things like that. I had an art teacher that I took a painting to, I was really proud of, that said it was rubbish. I stopped painting. They're very minor things, but if you can understand the impact that had, and then think about the impact that much bigger issues that we're going to talk about affect. And one of the things that, I've put there, that a good little example, if we're struggling to understand why someone is kicking off, or why someone is distressed about something, is sometimes thinking, well, have you ever overreacted to something? Have you ever felt that anxious? Have you ever had such a bad day and reacted or thought about it? We've all had these, you know, daydreams where we tell people what we really think, or, you know, escape from things. It's just, again, thinking of that and then thinking, right, if I exaggerate that by 1,000, I'll get a bit of an insight. And the other part of it is, you know, if I'm having a bad day or I'm really stressed about something, I think, you know, for a lot of our clients, this is how it is every single day. And in fact, my worst day is quite often their best day. For me, I know it's going to end. I know how to get myself out of it. Clients don't. And when you start thinking, what would it be like to have every single day to be this stressed? You can start getting a bit more of an empathy for what's really going on for people and what's driving them. The other thing is just, again, in evidence. There was a survey done in Scotland, people in drug and alcohol services, that found 79% had significant childhood trauma. I personally think it's higher than that. I think I've had quite a few clients who, you know, it's not about forcing people to think that they've had childhood trauma. It is about wording, and we're not going to get that deeply into it in this, because that's not what this training is about. But sometimes people will share, I've had people share with me things that have happened that are huge, you know, that they've had someone has harmed them in a way, and they just go, well, that's life. That's their coping strategy. It's not about going, well, actually, that is what's caused this, but it is about understanding that it probably did. And some people, you know, I've had people come in and say, but I had a good childhood. It's not about good or bad childhood, and we'll look at that in a minute. As I say, there's lots of people that, if you want to look deeper into this, Dr. Gabor Mate is a great place to start, watching some of his videos, reading his books. But his quote is, not all people with childhood trauma develop addictions, but all people with addictions have childhood trauma. Now, again, it can go back to what your definition of trauma is. But if you think in terms of trauma is a hurt and a wound that happened that didn't heal properly, the size of it will predict the impact, but it doesn't have to be something huge. I've had people that I've worked with outside of addiction services that, you know, have huge abandonment issues, and it was something as simple as, you know, the older sister wanted to play with her friends more than they wanted to play with her, and as a young child, putting a meaning to that, she suddenly, the pain she couldn't cope with. So there is this idea that trauma is when a child's emotional pain is so overwhelming and they've got nobody to help them with it. So let's move on. Don't know what that came to. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the Adverse Childhood Experience study. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this. I'm not going to go into great detail, but again, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris does a great book called The Deepest Well, which talks about it in detail, but also all the research that's been done since. So 1997, huge study, accidentally discovered a link between childhood trauma and obesity. It was a medical insurance company, so they sent out questionnaires with 10 specific things in childhood, got it back, compared it to how people were doing in adulthood, and found this huge, you know, 17,000 people replied, and they found this huge correlation. Since then, so there is some criticism, I'm going to address some of it, but since then, it's triggered a lot more research. There's already loads of research into how childhood affects people's development. This, because it was such a huge scale and it was purely statistical, people started taking notice. It's also been replicated all over the world. In England, it's different places in England have done it, Wales, other countries with exactly the same results. On a website I've put in the resources, Scotland is on course to become ACE Aware Nation. So they're using the insights from this study to underpin their court system, their jail system, their violence reduction units that have been copied throughout England as well, child services, schools, health services, mental health services. They are all triggering a change in approach by understanding the outcomes from this. So what are the outcomes? Right, so first of all, these are the 10 areas. There is a questionnaire that they use. I never use the questionnaire with people. Quite often I'll show people this and just explain what the research has shown. In terms of the research, they were all equal score. And the reality is, as I say, it's not necessarily the wound, it's how it's treated. They are all quite equal in effect, but when you look into the research, emotional neglect is actually the worst and can be more damaging than sexual abuse, and we'll give you a few examples of that. But basically people have a score of 1, and what they found is they have this sort of, it's like what they call a dose effect, so the more you have, the more of an impact. They looked at people that had a score of 4 or more, and what they found is that 4 or more with no safe adults, so that's nobody helping them through it, 7 times higher risk of developing an alcohol problem, 10 times higher risk of injecting illegal drugs compared to people who had 0. So we've got something, you know, very concrete there. And it's not that if you have this trauma in childhood, it means it will have damage. That's where a lot of criticism comes from. People have trauma in childhood and don't end up with addictions. But it's if you have trauma in childhood with no safe adult to help you deal with it and heal. So I've, you know, over the 20 years, I've probably nearly every client, we've talked about childhood trauma and this sort of thing. And whenever I say to people, you know, did you tell anybody? If you did, how was it handled? Not one single person said I told someone and I got help. Every single one said, the majority say they didn't tell anybody. A few of them say they told someone and they were told to stop lying or keep quiet. As I say, not one single person went, yeah, I told someone and they set up, they got me some counselling, they got me some support, they did this, they did that. And that's the difference. And that's one of the big criticisms, as I say, that people go, I had a bad childhood and I'm fine. We'll also just touch on that. So that's the bit more about one safe adult. Literally, again, not the trauma, it's how it's dealt with. But it's also knowing that our brains, what they call neuroplastic, they can repair. So that experience can start healing with the presence of at least one safe adult, and we can be that one safe adult. Now, obviously, if we get that in when someone's a child, it's easier to overcome. When people are adults and it's sort of ingrained, but it's still really important. You have more chance of helping someone change if we are that safe adult, which is what this is all about. So just to give you a few of the others, because it isn't just about addictions or obesity. The top ones I've sort of put because so we can't even go, and we're going to look at how stress affects people, but we can't even go, oh, they had a bad childhood and then they developed unhealthy coping styles, or they started using drugs or alcohol to cope with the emotional pain. It's a lot bigger than that. So what they've found is there's a high risk for physical health issues, even if someone lives a healthy life, if they've had a trauma that's unresolved. So there we've got, we can read it, 4 times more likely to diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, autoimmune, asthma, cancer. There's a much higher risk. I think I saw something recently that said stroke. There's a huge risk of stroke if you've got unresolved trauma. More importantly for us, we've got 10 times higher risk of suicide, 6 times higher risk of mental health treatment, 15 times more likely to have committed violence, 14 times more likely to be a victim of violence, 20 times more likely to be in prison, and obesity, smoking, teenage pregnancy, all these kind of things that if we can help people with their childhood and help them resolve that trauma, it reduces this risk. I've also put along the bottom, because there's just this interesting thing. I mean, I'm not going to go into health inequalities, but the prevalence of an ACE score is fairly even across all sort of groups of people, I'll say, but certainly in terms of socioeconomic, it's not hugely different. But what I think is that people with money end up having slightly different coping strategies or more opportunity to recover. But also a lot of people that, you know, there's this theory that a lot of politicians have quite high ACE scores and unresolved trauma. There's a lot of people, apparently it's higher than average in things like the police force and the army and helping professions. In our sort of profession, you'll get quite a lot. It also can come out as workaholism, being quite judgmental to other people. We all have different strategies. And again, this is about understanding, first of all, it's preventable, it's repairable, but also it's this idea that it touches most people, you know, and that's again where the empathy comes in. So just going to talk quickly about how it specifically affects people. part of what they call toxic stress. So the stress that people, you know, can cope with, it becomes toxic when we don't know when it's going to end. So I'm recording this, you know, we're going through the whole coronavirus situation. A lot of the stress that's caused with people is because of exactly this. We don't know when it's going to end. It's unpredictable. We feel a bit trapped and no choice. And for some people, no support. That they're all conditions where stress will become toxic rather than helpful. So it's about understanding that, you know, children, they don't have that concept of, right, everything's going to be fine. Mum, dad, people looking after me, the people abusing me, they're going to learn, they're going to stop at some point. They don't know that. They don't know sometimes when it's going to end. Is somebody going to come home and beat me or feed me? They have no choice. Children can't get up and go, I've had enough, this is not okay, I'm leaving. They literally have to say that. And again, it's that one safe adult. If they don't feel anybody understands, that's when it can lead to ongoing problems. But it's not just psychological. So I do really want to get this through, that children need a lot of energy for their body to physically develop. If that energy is diverted to survival and there's adrenaline going, it stunts the body's development. So Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris that I mentioned, she has some good stories. Dr. Bruce Perry, his book, The Boy Who Was Raised a Dog, brilliant examples of this. One of them is literally, you know, he was brought in to look at I think it was a 7-year-old boy who they thought of brain damage, but they couldn't find out why or what was wrong. It turns out that he'd had severe emotional neglect. I mean, one of the worst you could think of. And his brain just hadn't developed. It quite literally had not developed at all. His body had started growing, but it hadn't developed. They started treating him as if he was a baby and took him through all the development stages, and he fully recovered. So the two sides of that is our brain can fully recover, but that is how damaging it is. As I say, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris has a similar story. Assessed a boy, thought he was developing perfectly for a 4-year-old, and then he turned out he was 7. Abuse started age 4, his body just stopped growing. They can, Dr. Perry, if you look at his work, they can literally map by a child's development stages when abuse started. It has that much of an impact. So again, it's not about choice. It's not about, you know, get over it, talk, you know, there's a lot more going on with trauma. Children are focused on adults for survival. It's simply that, a baby, a child, they need people to look after them. So they end up adapting to get that protection. So I've also put there their brains develop through interaction. So again, that's why neglect, the brain just doesn't develop. But also it's this idea that children, you know, if you are beaten or criticized for being the real you, or for being too loud, or for not, you know, you end up learning it's not okay to be that way. So that can be where, and then as adults, it's almost like ingrained this belief that actually I'm not okay as I am. I'm not going to be protected if I'm too loud, or if I'm too quiet. You know, you can be stuck in the middle, or if I'm who I really am, then I get rejected, and that's, you know, one of the worst things. So I've said again, that's a bit more about, you know, they become highly vigilant. So literally, if you are wondering whether someone's coming home and is going to beat you or feed you, children learn to be so vigilant to the sound of footsteps, or to someone's tone of voice, to someone's emotion. They're still like that as adults. So again, that goes back to how we've got to be careful about our own emotions. They will pick up on it, and pick up on it sometimes when we don't. All this stress can cause literally their stress response to get stuck on. They're constantly looking for danger. So we know the fight, flight, freeze or fawn, constantly looking for danger, and their responses just become completely inflexible. And we're going to get onto specifics in a little minute. But literally, you know, you can have people. So I had a chap that, you know, he wanted what did he want? Sleeping tablets. Always asking for sleeping tablets. And then if he didn't get them, he threatened to kill himself. And by about the 4th or 5th time, when you're like, you're still not getting sleeping tablets, you think, wouldn't it make sense to try a different strategy? But he couldn't, because that was the only option he knew. He's not doing it anymore. We've helped him with that. But it's that idea that you think, well, why are you responding that way? You know it's not going to work. They don't know how else to respond until they feel safe. And unfortunately for a lot of our clients, their survival behaviour, so their responses that they've learned how to cope with their trauma, then attracts more evidence that they're right to behave the way that they do now. So, you know, more specifically with our clients that are into drug and alcohol use, you know, that's their way of survival. They end up surrounded with people that either take advantage of them, that reinforce their trauma, that make them feel more shame, or people that are dying around them, people, you know, lots of not so pleasant things. So it just reinforces that the world is not a safe place, or people are not safe. And then there's this, you know, we all want to feel safe. You know, given the choice, we would rather talk to someone we feel safe and comfortable and completely ourselves with than someone that we don't. And safety means familiarity. So this is another difficulty that we have, that people would rather stay with what they know unless they feel safe enough to try something new. And they keep repeating, and that's the same with behaviors and responses. They keep repeating the same patterns until they feel safe enough to explore something new. And if they get it wrong or it doesn't work, they can retreat and they feel safe. And again, that's something we can all relate to. You know, you don't want to try something new if somebody's going to judge you or make fun of you, or, you know, you're going to feel more shame if you get it wrong. You're going to avoid that. It's the same, but on a huge, as I say, exaggerated level for our clients. Not going to go into a great deal about trauma and brain development, but it is just to, you know, again, children's brains develop from the bottom up. We've got on your left, typical development, when a healthy brain develops, you know, and when someone feels safe, the survival part of your brain is calm, and it's almost on standby. You don't really need it. When people have had developmental trauma, and when people feel stressed and unsafe, that survival part powers up and takes sort of priority over your thinking. So when you're stressed, when you're in life and death situation, it's the survival part, the adrenaline, the, you know, and your brain is only focused on survival, and you cannot think long term. That's what it's like a lot of the time for clients. So that's why, you know, again, it's just trying to emphasize this. If people feel safe, they can access the cognitive part of their brain, which is about future planning, which is about thinking things through, which is about changing your beliefs, changing your thought patterns, and learning. If you feel unsafe, that part is shut down, and the part about surviving this moment kicks in. And we're going to look at survival behaviors, but it literally is that. The other thing to learn about that is that if someone's feeling unsafe, if we feel unsafe, if we're in survival mode, we cannot help someone feel safe. They're going to pick up from us. So there is there's a thing called polyvagal theory that's coming up in trauma informed, quite complicated, but it's quite interesting as well. But it talks about how when people feel unsafe, they look to other people for feedback on whether they can relax and feel safe or not. So if you think of a simple example, you hear a big bang, you turn round. If you see someone, you know, with a box at their feet going, sorry, you know, you relax. If you turn around and you see people running out the room, your adrenaline kicks in. You know, and there's a lot more subtle stuff around that. Again, it's about picking up on people's emotions, but sometimes we will look to other people. Again, it's this: if a client comes in and they're feeling stressed and they pick up on your stress, they're not going to calm down, and then that's when things can get difficult. So what does that mean for us? Again, we're emphasizing safety first. We've got to develop that safe relationship. It makes life so much easier. Even if you believe that not everybody has trauma, behaving towards everybody and creating that safe relationship, there's no downside to it. It's just, I was going to say common decency. It's about being human. It's about being compassionate to everybody and missing nobody out. You know, it's a way of being. Understanding that as trauma changes the way the brain works, we need to approach them and their behavior differently. Don't just tell people to change. It's not about you need to change the way you behave. You need to stop getting angry. You need to give people alternatives. So I've got a chap that, you know, I think he got a warning for threatening someone on the phone, getting angry and threatening someone on the phone. And I just said, if you get angry, put the phone down. Until we learn a better way, put the phone down. It's better to put the phone down than threaten someone. It's about being a bit more creative and helping people and going, yeah, exactly. Until we help you learn a better way, this is, I think, what's going to help. You know, having said that, this is about being realistic. We're human. If somebody triggers something in us and we get scared or we get frustrated, yes, we want to go, how dare you speak to me like that? That's not acceptable. But it's about then reflecting on it and learning and going, actually, that's the only way they know how to respond. How are we going to help them? Most clients are still, you know, experiencing the pain of trauma and respond from that place. Take away their coping strategy without a better one in place will leave them in pain. So I think it's Dr. Treisman that has a great quote: don't take down fences until you know what they were built to protect. So we shouldn't be taking away people's coping strategies unless we address what they're coping with. Now, some people, you know, there are people who've gone through recovery, and I'm not talking about doing trauma therapy, it's about having that safe relationship. And some people naturally, as they get older, they start letting go of some of these or learning new strategies. So as I say, most people do not need. In the ACE study originally, they thought if they started talking to people about adverse childhood experiences, it'll open a can of worms, people will, you know, start getting more distressed. They didn't, you know. And again, with this, people are already living with this trauma. Us asking about it is not going to, depending on how we ask about it, but us asking about it is not going to cause them more pain. And they actually set up a helpline that was open 24/7 for people when they did the ACE study, the ACE questionnaire and stuff. If they needed help, in a year, not one single person rang it. They offered one-to-one support, they offered counselling, nobody needed it. They were living with it, and actually what they reported is understanding it's not their fault and why it's happening helped enough. Some people are going to need specific therapy, and we need to be providing that. But for most, we don't need to be that experienced in it. And as I said before, toxic stress, we have to do the opposite. So we have to, you know, it's not about saying to people your treatment will end on this date, but I mean in sessions. Right, we've got half an hour. Sometimes, so I've got a lovely lady that she started talking a little bit about her past experiences, but because she's never done it before and it's so overwhelming, she literally can do a couple of minutes and then she runs. And it's making it okay to do that, you know, and not saying, oh my God, no, you've got to stay and talk about this, you can't. We're going to look a bit more specifics around that. But it's just about giving people choice. We should always be giving people choice. You know, even if it's, you don't have to come. If you want to stay in treatment, we need to do this. Asking people how we can help them. And being that sort of, as I say, safety. Giving that support, knowing it's there, giving other avenues of support, it all helps. And now, as I say, a bit more specific. Now this is, oh, actually no, I've put a quote in there first. Actually, I just added this, but so this is a quote from, as I say, Centre for Homeless Impact Festival, from a service user. They said, I often got accused of not engaging, that was hard to reach, that was difficult, but I didn't show emotion. If you understand my trauma, you would understand why. So again, this is quite a common thing. Clients feel a lot of shame. They struggle to articulate what exactly is going on, or they don't feel safe enough to articulate. And then we judge them as not motivated or not engaging. They're not. We're just not working in a way that makes it easy for them. So I thought I'd add that in. Examples and signs of trauma. This is just a quick list. You'll get it in your handout, so don't worry too much. But it's the sort of things that people will exhibit because of past trauma. No self-worth, no hope, don't believe they deserve better. So, you know, it can be really difficult when you get a client that's, well, yeah, whatever, you know, I don't deserve to do well or have good things or to be off drugs or get the help. It's really difficult. But it's about understanding, don't push, keep pushing that don't push them to change, but do push that they have a choice and it's at their pace. So it's really reinforcing that. People that are completely shut down can be one of the hardest, because there's that complete apathy and they can't even be bothered coming in. Doesn't mean they don't need help. It might mean we're not the right people for them. But again, it's that safety, no pressure, and not judging them as unmotivated, that, you know, oh, if they really wanted it, they'd go. Constantly feeling unsafe and looking for danger and stuck in a stress response. So I've put there, this can be people with severe anxiety, severe anger, you know, it can be the shutdown as well. But again, it's being calm, being predictable, preempting and not telling them to change. So by preempting, it's if you've got something to tell someone, just thinking through, if they're in survival mode, what would be a good way to approach it? You know, that whole communication skills. Hypervigilance with others' emotions and possible rejection. We talked about how they're hypervigilant. check your own emotions, you know, and I've said before about naming how stressed you are if you are stressed without breaching confidentiality, but being calm, predictable, preempting, similar sort of stuff. Feeling lack of control, so again, that whatever, when you give them choice and they just go, well, it don't matter, do what you want. It's, you know, really pulling that rabbit out of the hat, bending over backwards to go to them, actually it does. And we want to give you choice. What do you want? And it can get frustrating because sometimes you just want to tell people. They don't know how to interact healthily and have boundaries. And I'm going to develop another training on boundaries because I think we get it wrong a lot of the time. Boundaries are there for us to set our preference about how we want people to behave with us. They're not a judgment, they're not a law, they're what we've learned or what as an organisation we've set. People growing up with trauma do not know what boundaries are, or they have their boundaries violated regularly. We need to teach them, we need to be curious about what's going on with them, and we need to help them change rather than blame them. And there's a good, I think I put it in somewhere, Brené Brown quote, boundaries and accountability, not judgment and blame. We can set boundaries, we can set expectations, and we can hold people accountable without making them feel bad. And it's having that in mind. They don't trust people, or they expect to be let down or lied to. You need to be trustworthy and patient. It's simple, really. They feel they have to be someone else to get needs met, so they manipulate, they lie, they people please, they're compliant. So an interesting thing is sometimes people will go, and I've been caught out by it sometimes, you think, wow, I've got a really good relationship, or you come up with an idea, or how about we try this plan, and they're like, yeah, brilliant, I'll get on and do that, and then don't do it over and over and over, because their trauma survival behavior is to agree. That is what literally saved their life as a child. They feel more comfortable doing it. Or it could be lying. You know, we should be thinking, why do they feel they have to lie to us, or what is the benefit? And sometimes we've got to be honest, there is no benefit sometimes for them being honest with us. It's just gonna, you know, when it comes to maybe someone who's been abstinent for a while, they have a little lapse. If they're on weekly pickup, if they're on opiate substitution and they're on weekly pickup, and then it's like, right, you're going on daily. Of course they're going to lie. Why, you know, why would they be honest? I had someone that was getting a holiday script, and we'd said, you know, they need to have a negative test when we give them the script. They brought someone else's urine in because they'd had a slip up and they were so terrified that they wouldn't be able to go on holiday. You know, you can sort of understand, but then we get upset and we're like, why are you lying? Why do you know? There's a reason. So it's trust, not confront. You know, you can say to people, you know, I'll quite often say, oh, that's interesting. It just seems a bit off, or you've said this before, or there's something feels a bit weird about this, but I don't know what it is. Don't confront them outright. It's not about, you know, oh, people will say, I had someone once say to me, oh, this client lied to you and you didn't even know. And I was just like, how do you know? I didn't know. Maybe I just didn't raise it. Maybe, you know, that's not the way I work, because I want people to feel confident enough to be honest, and there's a bit more work there. Encourage disagreement. You know, look, don't get upset if they disagree or they challenge. It's healthy. Shame. People who've had trauma feel shame. And the antidote to shame is sharing a story, like we talked about with the Brené Brown principles in the beginning, sharing a story, being accepted, still being cared about. Trust, listen, no judgment, normalize. You know, and again, sometimes preempting it, if you know someone feels shame about something, is being able to go, oh, you know, lots of people feel this, it's okay. Just get in there. Rapid and overwhelming mood changes, well, we've all had clients like that. Calm, predictable, no blame, regulate them and us, and get support. It can be so draining, but it's again a survival strategy that they've learned, and it's also about them coping with their own emotions. I was listening to something recently, it was talking about, you know, again, a way of dealing with people when we maybe, you know, it affects us the way that they behave, and it's about thinking about if they're having a go at you or accusing you of something, understanding that it's not actually you they're accusing, it's probably the person that abused them as a child. But because, you know, they're still in that loop of trying to change things or trying to hope things are better, and you've reminded them of something and they're just aiming it at you. So not taking it personally. So we're going to talk specifics now. when we talk about people we find difficult, there is no such thing as a difficult person, just someone who pushes our buttons, but not everyone's. I remember going on a Buddhist retreat a long time ago, but the guy speaking, he was like a stand-up comedian, it was great, but he was talking about, you know, you might think someone's an arsehole, but someone else loves them. Who's right? You know, and in a blunt way, it's something you might find them difficult. Your whole team might find them difficult, but there are other people in life that don't. So it's about going, actually, are they difficult, or is it just that we're struggling with their behaviour? Before I move on to specifics, though, I just want to say, all this work about trauma-informed and understanding, it's not about giving people excuses to behave in any way. It is 100% about stopping people damaging themselves or others, but doing it in a way that helps them heal and change, rather than reinforcing, re-traumatizing, or punishing them for not being capable of better yet. And it's tough, I'm not saying it's easy, but if we want to do this job well, it's what we do. And remember to see the pain driving the behaviour, so we don't respond in a way that just adds to their pain. And this idea of preserving the dignity in them and us. So we're going to look at specific behaviours, but sometimes people trigger things in us where we behave in a way, or even mentally, you know, we want to scream at them, or we get stressed, or we just avoid, or something like that. And it's about going, actually, I love this word dignity. Are we looking at the humanity on both sides and helping us move on, which is a bit of a deep one. Right, so this is the method that I use. I use it with clients, use it with staff, used it for years, used it with teams, helping to understand their behaviour towards each other. It's a real generalisation, which is why sometimes it can be easy to understand. But it's this idea that, in general, there are 4 categories of behaviour that people will go into when they feel unsafe or threatened. So the smiley face in the middle, we feel safe, we feel calm. We're going to look at these. Now, it's not saying that these behaviours are not correct in some situations, but if it is a way to help yourself survive, if you're stuck and you can't do anything else, then it's about looking at it. So intimidators, and that can be anybody from people who are violent to people who, you know, slamming a door, huffing and puffing, slamming a pen down on the desk, that sort of thing. We all do it occasionally. Interrogators are the verbal version of that, but it's also people that use sarcasm. Sarcasm can be brilliant to, you know, break ice and be funny at the right time. If it's done to put people down so that you feel better and in control, it's not good. So clients can sometimes, you know, constantly be criticizing or interrogating. So sometimes you'll have clients, well, why are you writing that down? What are you going to do with it? Who are you going to tell? Why are you doing that? Why are you asking? You know, that sort of thing. Or verbal abuse, of course. Poor me. So poor me, you know, want us to rescue them. You give them options, you give them things that will help, and they don't do them. Constantly think life's unfair, cry, the emotional blackmail stuff. Well, if you cared, you'd do this. You don't care about me, that sort of thing. Again, you know, if someone is going through something tragic, it's okay to feel like that. If they're like that, whatever you do. So an example I sometimes use, you know, somebody comes in and says their benefits stopped. And you say, right, shall we ring them and find out what's going on? And they say, no, I'll do it. You see them a week, 2 weeks later, they're talking about they've not eaten for days because they've still not got any money. Did you ring the benefits agency? No, I didn't. Do you want us to do it? No, it's all right, I'll do it. And it's that sort of ongoing. And you almost feel like, you know, and you say, do you want a food parcel? No, it's all right, I'll be fine. You almost want to say, stop talking about not eating if you're not going to, you know, accept the help. But again, it's understanding it's driven by a trauma thing and a feeling helpless. And the sort of learned helplessness, whatever you do, is not going to work. Aloof. So aloof people that withdraw, that sulk, you know, that avoid appointments, avoid talking about things, avoid changing, and maybe seem a little bit detached and don't care. So I did this with an organisation once, and we were talking about this, and somebody said something, and it was really interesting that it sort of triggered all these responses in people. But the aloof people, you could literally see in their mind leaving the room, or they're starting to turn. So you know, when you're in a session and a client, you can see they've had enough. Now again, this can be okay. I'm an introvert. Introverts, when something's been going on too long, I need a bit of silence and I need to recover. That's fine, but it's when people are like this within 5 minutes or all the time, And again, they're called control dramas, because if someone feels unsafe or uncomfortable or threatened, in their mind, if I behave in this way, then I can control the situation. So if an intimidator starts screaming and shouting and threatening, that will affect your response, and then they're feeling a bit more in control. It's the same with any of them. Now, people can have a favourite, which they learn from childhood, but if that doesn't work, they'll try another. So if somebody is an intimidator, but you stay calm, engaged, dealing with it, they then might go into poor me. So they have a go at you. It makes no difference. They then will get really upset, cry. It's not fair. I'm sorry. I didn't mean, again, it's just a trauma response that they've learned. And it is just about understanding that. We're going to look at how to deal with it. But first of all, hopefully while I've been talking about it, we all have usually one that we find harder to deal with than others. So if you think of your clients, but also you can think of people outside work. If you think of someone you find difficult or who winds you up or, you struggle with, which category are they in? So have a think about that. For me, I know it's poor me. I'm getting better at it, but I know it's most definitely that's the one that I struggle with most. When you're having an interaction with that person, have a think about how you respond. People only become difficult and conflict only occurs when somebody moves into one box and we move into another box or the same box. If we stay in the center, we stay calm, engaged, and I'm going to look at how you do that, we can then draw them back in. If somebody, say somebody, and quite often they pair up. So poor me and intimidator go well together. So somebody might become poor me, feeling sorry for themselves, and somebody starts becoming angry at them sat around feeling sorry for themselves. The more we go into boxes, the more we push people out. And that's when things escalate. So it literally is about pulling people back into the middle. And again, this is going to be in your handout, but just for you to sit and work through. Think of someone you find difficult, think of how you react, think about how you change your reactions. So the idea is you can force people to change and say, get out if you're not going to behave. You're not going to learn and grow. You're not actually helping them. It's about going, right, well, if I can learn to feel calm and safe in this situation, that is going to benefit them. I'm not saying it's easy, but the more you do it, the more you learn, the easier it becomes, because you can diffuse people really quickly. You can, and you feel better at the end of it. There's nothing worse than a client winding you up and then you having to deal with it afterwards. So tips to stay calm, it's using this as a training. Remember to breathe. So quite often if we're feeling triggered, our breathing becomes shallow. Have a mantra. I've had a few examples. This whole idea, from the dementia training is around, they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. Or that curiosity, I wonder who this is really aimed at. I wonder what the pain is behind. Obviously, I'm not saying, so if somebody is in crisis, so if somebody is in poor me to the state where they want to kill themselves, or if somebody's in the anger where they point they're going to harm someone, we're not talking about those situations. You need immediate action for that. What I'm talking about is the things a little less than that. So if you imagine a time you felt calm and safe, they're not going to know. If you quickly have, and the more you do it, the quicker it'll happen. If you quickly have a, or a person, imagine someone there that helps you feel safe, you will relax. I love this curious, not furious. Curious about what's going on and how you're going to help them out of it. I've put that, do you want to be right or do you want to help? Because I think, again, if our own stuff's triggered, we literally have that, how dare you, you have no right to speak to us like that. Yes, you might be right, but is that going to resolve the situation? Is it going to help move things forward? Is it going to change anything? So exactly that, sometimes checking with yourself. I'm getting annoyed with this person. I want to tell them I'm not having it anymore. That they need to stop talking about the fact that they've not got any money, because it's starting to get a bit irritated when they won't accept help. Actually, is that going to change anything? Is it going to help them learn? And afterwards, you've got to reflect what was going on. If you were stressed before, you're already partly off balance. What can you learn? Sometimes, as I say, we've got a core issue that's triggering our response. How can we deal with that? And use all the stuff we tell clients. So again, this is one of those what do we teach clients? How to deal with anger, how to deal with emotions, how to, you know, let's start using it ourselves. So a bit more specific, there's a thing, I think it comes from, no, I think it's Beacon House, but it's based on the Bruce Tracy stuff, but they talk about, like, with children whose behaviour is way off balance, and they talk about regulate, reconnect and reason. So you need to calm people down, connect with them, and then discuss it. I add the extra step in that before you calm them down, you have to calm yourself down. So you need to check yourself that you're calm, predictable, present, that you're dealing with, it's like anything, you're dealing with that behaviour right then, not that behaviour and all their behaviour in the past, or that behaviour and worrying about the future right then. Be curious. It's about connecting with them. And then, as I say, diffusing it and leading them out. It's not about ignoring behaviour and pretending it's not there. And then when it's calm, discuss what happened, empathise. That can't be very nice for you. Explain what the consequences could be. So I've got someone, as I say, that can be quite high risk, and I have just explained to him, look, it's not your fault that, you know, your trauma has led to you responding like this, but a lot of services are scared, a lot of services don't know how to handle it. While you're being like that, it limits the options that you've got. So how about we start looking at how we can help you, and ask how you help them respond differently. So again, about teaching boundaries, not punishing. And we need to process afterwards. We need to reflect, and we need to make sure, because even if we're engaged, handling a lot of emotions has an impact, and we need to be able to shake it off. And now again, get into a bit more specifics, and you'll get a copy of this that you can look at. But what I mean by engaging with them, so with an intimidator, none of this, you know, sit down, have a low voice, all that kind of thing, and say, calm down. We all do it. For some reason, I don't understand, when people are angry, we all have this tendency to say, calm down, when actually that never really helps. But actually naming it and saying to people, look, I'm really sorry that you're so angry. What's happened? I really want to help you, but I'm struggling to understand, you know, when you're shouting. Do you want to take 5 minutes? Do you want to come back and then we'll discuss it? Just listening, just letting them rant, you know, learning this art of apologising without admitting fault. You know, it's okay to say to people, as I say, I'm really sorry you're feeling like that. I'm really sorry this has not worked out for you. Let's see what we can do. Always, even if you think there is nothing you can do, say to them, let me listen and I'll see what I can do. Because if they think you've at least tried, it will help repair. If you go, well, there's nothing I can do, it's just the way it is. Even if you just go off and go, right, this is highly unlikely that I'm going to be able to change this, but let me just have a check and see what options we've got. It gives them time to calm down, helps with that. Interrogator. So I always go, when people are like that and they're being really critical or questioning or something, and I just start off with, are you okay? You seem a bit anxious. This isn't like you to be usually, even if it is, but you can say, you know, you seem a little bit more anxious than normal. Or you're not usually this critical or this, you know. I was just saying, if you know someone, saying, well, I can tell something's wrong just by the way you're being. If it's a work situation, or even with some clients, you can go, look, I'm really struggling to, you know, keep my head around this and get this done. Can you find a way to, you know, write down how you're feeling and what your responses are, and we'll come back to it. Just thinking of things like that. And afterwards going, you know, I notice when you're feeling stressed, you can become critical, and just talking about it. Poor me, this must be really hard. What can we do to change it? Sometimes I'll do and we discussed this before, what did we come up with? What, you know, did you try that? What got in the way? What was the problem? Is it, you know, like, and again, it's a bit of normalizing, you know, I'm always going, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to get fit, I'm going to start, you know, going for a walk every day, and then it doesn't happen. So it's about sort of empathizing in that way and understanding and going, right, how can we change that? But don't indulge them. Don't do the, you know, oh, you poor thing, it must be awful, and of course I care, and not, you know, it's getting right into it. You can say, you know, why would you say that to yourself? And again, don't get annoyed, don't get like, you've worked with me long enough to know that's not true. We can feel like that, but it's just about catching it and calming, taking a breath, respond in a different way. Aloof, I can see that something wrong. You don't want to talk about it? How about we leave it for a little while and come back to it? Do you need a 5-minute break and then we'll come back to it? You know, with some people, they'll use a bit of distraction to make you back off. You know, they'll start going off at a tangent, and it's about, you know, I'll sometimes have a laugh with people and then go, right, I know you're avoiding, let's get back to it. And sometimes, as I say, it's chunking up. So if you're talking about something that they're struggling with, lighten things up a little bit and then go back down. Now these, you know, you can still use these. So I know for some people they work on what's called duty. Things might be kicking off in reception. They've not met someone before. You can still do some of this. It takes a lot of practice. And I think one of the things I would advise people to start with is learning how to calm yourself. And it's one of these situations, you know, if you're in, I'm always fascinated, and I used to do a lot of martial arts, I'm always fascinated by what they call internal martial arts, their whole philosophy that you've got to keep yourself calm. You don't respond from a place of anger. You think of policemen, firemen, even paramedics, people like that. Us, we learn to deal with things that the average person doesn't and not be shocked by it. We can learn how to stay calm and manage behaviour without, we're still going to be effective, but without being able to catch ourselves, calm down and deal with it. We will all have one of these that we find really easy. It's about then, it's like a muscle, and strengthening the others. And again, understanding there's something driving this that's much deeper. You know, it's like a program in a computer that hitting a key is not going to change. It needs something a bit deeper. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a, it's a huge overview. The whole, and again, it's about, we're going to look at self-care next, but it is about going, but how can I learn this within a context of being a really busy service? And within a context, you know, for me, we need it more because of that. But it's about being kind to yourself. And if you're working flat out, or you are not given the space to learn things like this and develop and reflect, you do the best you can. And it's, you know, there's a whole other thing of what sort of beliefs and things that we need to have, that we've got to believe that everything that we do will make a difference. And that if we didn't do it, it'd be worse. It might not be the best help that they can get. In an ideal world, we'd have half the caseload and lots more time, lots more resources. We don't, but we've got to keep believing that every little bit that we do is going to help, and safe relationships at the core of it. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you in part 3 once I have stopped everything.